Welcome, my friends, to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today for a fun conversation with a passionate author. We're kicking off the program, like it's our tradition, with a short reading from the feature book. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started.
Hi, Internet. I'm Ben Monroe. I'm an author from the San Francisco Bay Area. I write primarily horror and delve into a little bit of weird from time to time. My new book, The Seething, came out in March. It's done pretty well. People who've read it seem to have enjoyed it. It's a horror novel set in the mountains of Northern California, by a little creepy town on a lake there in the hills and mountains. I'm going to read a little bit from you in a second. The basic backstory to where we've gotten here is something weird's going on in town. There's a thing in the lake which is bothering people without giving too much away, but it's being a hassle. I'm going to jump in kind of in the middle of a chapter. Charlie Gaines has been out for a hike, thinking about his life, where things are going. He's an older guy, maybe 50s, early 60s, and he's wandering a trail that he used to hike when he was younger and came across a cabin that was sort of a local legend that he and his friends used to talk about. Went inside and the floor collapsed out from under him. Old WPA thing. So that's the setup to where we are right now. So we're going to jump in here with this excerpt from The Seething from Bridges Gate Press. Charlie woke in a dark chamber, lying on his back in a shallow pool of muddy, brackish water. A small circle of light shone down from the hole above him, casting a bright glow across his torso. He rose slowly from unconsciousness, only fully regaining his senses when he felt prickling spreading over his bruised hands. He itched the back of one with the other and was revolted to feel the squelching pop of chitinous bodies and something slick and vile slimed his fingers. His eyes opened immediately and saw that his hands and arms were swarming with fat white spiders, wobbling along on tiny swollen legs. They crawled in crazy drunken patterns over his exposed skin while their bodies extruded sticky strands of webbing. With a sharp, almost barking yelp, he sprang to his feet, cracking his head on a beam on the ceiling of the low vault, the underflooring of the shack above. Looking up, he saw blue sky overhead through the ruined floorboards through which he'd fallen. Charlie slapped his hands together, wiping off the strange arachnids from his hands, swatting them off his legs. The creatures fell to the muddy pool and rotten splintered planks around him and tried to make their escape. He stamped and splashed madly, his foot landing on a dry patch of ground where they crunched underfoot, and he felt their bodies split and squirt viscous fluid as he crushed them. The last of the strange, pale spiders crawled away into the muck, and he took a few breaths and felt himself relax. The wind groaned above, rattling the thin walls. Thin eddies of air seeped down past the boards like searching fingers and caused a handful of dry oak leaves to flutter down into the pit with him. His eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness surrounding him. The pit was at least 10 feet deep, a hollowed-out basin below the cabin. He raised his hands toward the lip of the hole above him, but couldn't quite reach the splintered wood. The walls were wet and smooth, almost clay-like, and the pool of water filled one end of the small chamber where the walls went straight down into it. Across from that, closer to below the hole, the ground sloped up gradually for a few feet, ending in a solid wall of dirt. While he was taking in his grim, slimy surroundings, he heard a furtive splashing noise from across the small chamber. Instantly alert, his breath caught in his chest. He waited and he listened. The sound came again, a bubbling splash from the far end of the pool. His heartbeat pounding in his chest, his breath still caught in his throat. His blood flushed with adrenaline, and every instinct urged him to flee. There was a brief moment of stillness, and he released his pent-up breath. And a frothing, berserk seething as the water churned around on over him. His eyes burst wide with terror as he felt something like icy claws grasping his legs, firm and sharp, and something unseen burbled in the murk and muck. A growling, shattering, furious cacophony of nonsense howling and gibbering from under the murky water. Charlie pulled against the force gripping his legs. His fingers clawed desperately at the clay walls as he was dragged into the murk. Tears of fear rolled down his cheeks in thick, fat streams. "Help!" he screamed to the hole above him, but watching it pull away inch by excruciating inch. "God, somebody help me!" Slimy and thread-like tendrils slid with excruciating deliberateness around his face and throat, like roots or fingers encircling him, pulling tight, forcing their freezing cold lengths between his teeth as his mouth filled with a foul, bitter taste. Fiery pain exploded in his mouth as the sharp, rigid things pierced his tongue, lanced through his cheeks. the barbed lengths ripped at his limbs and body, squeezing, tearing, and with one final tug, whatever unseen force was below the water dragged him down. Murky green haze washed across his vision as his eyes filled with stinging water, and he was pulled into the darkness.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. Thank you, everyone, for joining us back to a new season and watching all these amazing authors joining us this whole week long. I'm hoping you guys are enjoying this amazing celebration. If you're new to the podcast, my friends, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss a single episode. We have authors bring you incredible books all the time. I hope you enjoy that reading as much as I did. And I'm not even a horror fan. We're going to get started. Hello, Mr. Ben. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing this morning?
I am fabulous. I'm having this moment that I'm like amazed with horror authors because I'm not. I'm like, ooh, dude, you have things crawling on you. And it's like, I was terrified from the things crawling on him. I was like, oh, wait, what just happened? Oh, that sounds horrible. Let's
Right.
start with this story. Where did this story come from? Can you tell us more about it?
Oh gosh, people have asked me that a lot, and I've kind of had to look back and think about the genesis of where this thing came from. A few years ago, probably the spring of 2018, is when I first had the idea. I like to hike and used to go trail running. I like to spend time outdoors when I can. And there's a lake near our house. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm living kind of near the Oakland Hills. And there's a lake nearby with like an 8 mile trail. It's beautiful. It's so nice to go hiking around. And it was during one of those summers where we were having a really desperate drought. Every 8 or 10 years as Californians, we start wondering, oh God, is the water all leaving for good this time? And so I was hiking around this lake, and I'd been going around it from the spring all through the summer. And I remember noticing the lake level coming down lower and lower until like these floating piers that people used to fish off of were just like wonk flat on the ground. There was no water under them. It had receded so far. And noticing these weird, like sort of runnels in the dry mud of the shore with strange like tentacle sort of patterns. I'm just wondering, wow, because that stuff had been like 10, 20 feet underwater before. Where did all that come from? So then I started thinking, I don't know, and maybe just being a horror fan, horror author, this is the kind of place your brain goes. If there's a monster on that lake, it sure is a lot closer to the shore now. It'd be a lot easier for that monster to get people, right? So that kind of my mind started spinning from there. And that led me to the secondary thought was if there was something awful living in a lake like that, and its habitat, its ecosystem was literally evaporating, what might it do to try to get out and find a more habitable place for it to live? And that just kind of coupled with some ideas for some characters clicked together somehow. I started writing the book, and that was really the genesis of where this whole thing came from.
Have you always been a horror fan? Has this always been your genre?
I think so. Yeah, I go back the earliest evidence. My brother's an archaeologist, and so we use terms like that a lot. The earliest evidence we can find. I have a story, and not really a story, it's like a sentence that I wrote when I was in nursery school. So I was probably 4 years old. I think I'd just seen the Lon Chaney, the old Universal Studios, the Wolfman on TV, and I was obsessed. I was drawing pictures of the Wolfman. And you can see down below where I tried to explain the story of the Wolfman in 4-year-old terms to like my nursery school teacher. So she had written down a little thing about it. I still have that in some papers. I can't remember a time when I didn't just enjoy monsters. We had a show, Creature Features, when I was growing up in Berkeley in the 70s, where you get to see all the old Universal pictures and weird stuff like Robot Monster and The Incredible Two-Headed Transplant, just strange old movies, and all the Ray Harryhausen films with the dragons and cyclopes and stuff. I just loved all that stuff for as long as I can remember.
I am very much in awe because I'm a very much wuss when it comes to some of these things. So it's like, oh my God, my heart goes out to you. Absolutely loving the fact that you put this book together. As readers get to enjoy this, what can they expect?
Well, one of my favorite kinds of horror, I don't really know if there's a term for it. A lot of horror these days seems to be splintering into a lot of different types. People talk about body horror, cosmic horror, weird horror, all kinds of stuff. So I don't know. But one that I really like, I'm going to coin a phrase now. It's called everyday horror or everyman horror. I like stories about basically ordinary people who are thrust into an extraordinary situation. So in the Seething, you've got a family going through some relatable stuff. The dad's been laid off. The mom's kind of in a transition period. They've got a teenage daughter who's being a teenage daughter, and they're trying to figure stuff out. They're in a very transitory period in their life. They've gone back to this house in the mountains where the dad grew up. His father just died mysteriously, actually in chapter one, not giving too much away. So they return to the house because it's sort of a calm, quiet place where they can reflect and figure out, well, what's the next step for us? And then everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Nothing quite works out for him. One of the examples I use of that kind of horror also is King's Pet Cemetery, where it's all completely relatable people. You get that. The dad's got a new job. He's working at this teaching hospital. Mom's a perfectly regular person. The kids are little kids who do little kid things. And just when a relatable tragedy happens to them, the little kid is killed in a car accident, and the family's now dealing with grief. Like halfway into this book, these are regular people you've gotten to know, and then the ghosts show up, and then the horrible zombies come, and things takes these regular people, shoves them in a meat grinder. So that's really what I like to write about. So the Seething is very much, in my opinion, in that style. Regular people you can get to know, a setting that I think anybody could figure out. It's based on my experience visiting and traveling through small towns in Northern California. I think it's a story pretty much anybody could really get, and then the weird stuff starts to happen.
The relatable part of the everyday life that connects you. Because he was just minding his own business and fell. I'm like, oh, wait, what? What just happened? He wasn't ghost hunting, he wasn't out of his way trying to go, let me go figure this out. Like he was minding his
Right,
own business. That connection makes it probably a little bit more scary than if the ghost came out of you out of nowhere. Because you're going,
right.
that could happen to me.
That's something I like to do, and I really did focus on when I was writing this evening is when someone's going to die, which happens in a horror novel. We all know that. I wanted it to be impactful. I wanted you to feel that. So I get into that character. Nobody just shows up and dies. You get to know them a little bit. You get to maybe see them for a couple of chapters. Maybe they become somebody you're kind of like, oh, I like this guy. I'd like to go have lunch with him. He seems pretty cool. And then when it happens, I hope anyway, it's much more impactful. You really feel what had just happened.
So you enjoy torturing your readers for this emotional connection. Let's just put it out there. I'm going to translate for everybody because they're like, what does that mean? He wants you to connect to them. So when they're gone, you're like, oh, that hurt. This is what horror
Well,
writers do.
I don't think it's a cruel thing. I think a lot of horror writers are probably kind of working through some stuff, who knows. But I also think it's interesting, it's worth thinking about that horror is the only genre that's named for an emotion. You don't feel sci-fi, you don't feel fantasy, but horror gets you. It grips you with its icy cold fingers and squeezes your guts and makes you feel something. And so I think when you're writing horror, you should be doing that. You should be trying to get an emotional response from your reader.
It's an unapologetic genre, let's be honest. You know from the beginning that something's going to happen and you're going to be emotionally attached. So
Right,
for readers like me, that is way too much for comfort. Don't pick it up. You're going to
right.
go through this trauma and it's okay. But I love the passion you bring to the pages. I love the emotions that you're bringing in. And I really got committed. I felt bad for him. It's like, I want to know, is he going to be okay? Now that I know he's not going to be okay, I was like, oh, sorry, dude, my bad.
Well, funny that that character too. That chapter actually started as a short story I was working on, just was noodling around with. And I'm like, I like this guy so much. I can't just get rid of him here. So I rewrote a lot of the opening to fit that thing into the book because I liked him so much. I wanted, oh man, I would love to see him for a few more chapters. So he actually gets kind of an arc through the first half of the book. We get to learn more about him. He's a pretty cool guy.
That makes me feel better. There is more to him than this hole in the ground and thing dragging him. Love it. So, Mr. Ben, what else are you working on? What is the mind of a horror author up to now?
Oh gosh. So I've got a couple more short stories I'm working on. I've got a few actually coming out through the rest of this year. One of them in a rock and roll themed horror anthology, and one, oh gosh, I'm actually not sure if it's coming out this year or it should be soon. It's an anthology of stories of non-standard undead. So the guy
Oh,
didn't want this zombies and vampires. He's like, find something that people haven't written about to death. So I did some thinking about that. I've got another novel that I'd started it earlier in the spring. Life got busy. I kind of put it aside for a little bit. I'm getting back to that. which I'm pretty excited about. I still think that's horror, but it's got a very fantastical element to it. It's really been me thinking a lot about the purpose of mythology and folklore in our lives in the modern world. And then there's horror aspects with that as well. Because if you've read mythology, you know that horror is part of it.
Some of
um,
them don't end really well. Let's just put it out there. Some of the mythology that we're very familiar, unlike
oh,
Rick
yeah.
Gordon, that has a happy ending to most of the stuff. Most of them don't. And you're like, that's
Well,
a little
look at
vicious.
oh gosh, what the Cyclops cave scene from the Odyssey. That's right out of The Hills Have Eyes or Friday the 13th. This giant is like eating guys raw, and then they shove a hot poker in his eye to get rid of him. And it's it's like something out of a Sam Raimi movie.
All the way. The entire thing, you're like, ooh, that didn't turn out good. How did you switch back and forth between going from short stories to novel form? Like, is there a process you have, or can you jump between different projects?
Apparently, I can. So
I'm
that's actually
surprised.
funny. Yeah, no, when I was writing the Seething, I'm a pantser. I don't outline. I learned over many years of not writing at all that the reason I wasn't writing at all was because I was writing outlines for stories. And then by the time I got to the end of the outline, I've lost interest because, well, I already told that story. Who cares? I got to tell it again and make it longer. No, I'm not going to do that. So I just didn't. But when I was writing the Seething, I had ideas of where it was going along the way. And the more I would write, the more I'd have a clear concept of how I was going to get to the ending that I'd already envisioned. But I would take breaks. Where is this going? Not really sure. I'm going to set it aside for a little bit. And that was when I was working on short stories. I published probably 2 dozen short stories in the last couple of years as well. And a lot of that was just taking a break, follow a lot of different short story call groups on Facebook and Twitter or X, whatever it's called today. And I'd see something that caught my eye. Oh, I really want to write a story about, whatever that call happened to be. And I noodle away with that for a while, finish that one. And while I was doing that, the seething was percolating in the back of my head, and then I'd be able to jump back onto that. Okay, yeah, now I have a better idea of what's going to happen. Yeah, let's get back to that. And also, it gave me a chance to set it aside and come back to the book excited. Like I really want to see what's going to happen next. I'm really interested and invested in getting back to that story and that setting and those characters. And so I think it allowed me to keep bringing that enthusiasm to the page.
I'm very excited to hear that you can go back and forth and be able to get creative about the project you're working by doing the short stories. I'm very much one of those authors that I'm like, I have to be immersed in this universe and then I can jump out. But you also pantser. You said something that caught my eye that many pantsers have said it. They hate outlines because they get bored with the story.
Right.
How long did it take you to figure that out?
Oh, a long time. I'd written some short stories through my life. I had outlined numerous novels and ideas for longer pieces that I never got around to writing. Again, because I had lost interest. And it never really clicked for me until I wrote my first novel. The Seething's my second. My first was a contract book. It was actually a novel based on a board game property, a post-apocalyptic survival horror board game. Because I know we don't have a lot of time, but my joke is that was a book that came out of a copywriting gig, which suffered from extreme scope creep. It started with like, oh, can you write the back cover blurb for this game? Just write about what it's like. And they liked that. And they kept adding more stuff to it until it's like finally, well, we need a novel. Can you write a novel? I'd always wanted to. So I just basically said, oh, yeah, sure. I can do that. Not a problem. When do you need it? They said, well, we need it in 4 months. I said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Right. I had no idea what I was doing. I had read books on novel writing and I was about to start an outline. And I'm just like, I don't want to dink around anymore. I'm just going to write it, just get into it. I'll make some notes about where it's going. But I knew that with a 4 month deadline, I didn't really have any time to spare. So I just started writing the thing. And that was when I really realized that pantsing is what works for me. Just jump in, have some vague idea where it's going, and figure out how to get there.
That is priceless. For a lot of our listeners and a lot of aspiring authors, they spend a lot of time trying to fit everybody else's style into what they're doing. And you finally realize, I don't have the time. We got 4 months to write this book. We're just going to do it. So
Exactly.
deadline's a big motivation for you. I was like, how much time? Got it. So
Right.
love it. With that in mind, what advice would you give now that you have 2 novels, many short stories under your belt to an aspiring author? What will you tell them?
Well, I think we just kind of cover that, just do it. As a Nike ad says, if you have the urge to write something, just write it. And it's funny, for the last couple of years, every time NaNoWriMo comes along, the National Novel Writing Month, I've gone back to my kids' high school and met with as a group of kids in the library every year, different group, and talk to them about their projects and what they're working on, kind of give them my advice. And I always couch it with, you know, this is what works for me. It might not work for you. But the one thing that they always ask, or I always hear them kind of talking about, is rejection. And I have a theory on rejection as well, which is just don't worry about it. You know, nothing you write is going to make everyone happy, but you're going to find some people, or some people are going to find you that really like what you're doing. You're going to click with somebody, and those are your people. Keep writing for them. Write the stories that you want to write, and just assume that not everyone's going to like it. Some people will probably hate it. And there's nothing you can do to make them happy. Just if you get a rejection, you send out your short stories, you get a rejection, just take a breath, feel sad for a minute, move on. Send it out again, write the new story, just keep going.
That's actually really good advice. I love the rejection piece because sometimes that's the part that holds people back. What if they don't like it? You're going to have a lot of people who don't like it, but they
Right.
probably just don't like the genre. So it's okay. Take a
Yeah.
leap of faith. Love it. So, Mr. Ben, where can our listeners find you? Where they can learn more about your books, where you located? Tell us.
You can go to my website. It's very cleverly named, benmonroe.com. Spent a lot of time thinking that one up. And from there, you can find links to my books, or at least a list of my books. And you'll find whatever social media I happen to be active on at the time. I'm kind of taking a break from that right now, but I'm sure I'll get back to that in the next few weeks. You can find archives of podcasts and blog posts and things that I've done. It's sort of, if you have any interest in my work, one-stop shopping, benmonroe.com.
It's super easy. I like the fact that people can recognize it very simple. So, creativity sometimes is all about being efficient. So, let's go with efficient. So, thank you.
Right.
Okay. Dear, before you leave us, are you ready for the lightning round?
Let's do it.
Super easy. Don't think too much about this. Let's go. Water or juice?
Water.
Okay. Sweet or sour?
Sour.
Fruits or veggies?
Oh gosh, veggies usually.
Okay. I swear I did not put this here on purpose, but why not? Scary movies or comedies?
Well, I mean, that being said, I love scary comedies. Lost Boys, Shaun of the Dead. If you can make the two work together, that's probably my favorite kind of movie.
Shaun of the Dead is probably one of my favorites too. Love it. Okay, here is a little different. Let's see how you do with this. If you could be any Disney villain, who will you pick?
Oh gosh, any Disney villain. Oh wow. Could I be one of the Hitchhiking Ghosts from the Haunted Mansion? Or are we talking
Yeah,
only of movies? All right, one of
no,
them. I love them.
love it.
Ezra or Gus or somebody.
Why not? You can pick anything. Disney has plenty to choose from.
That's right.
Mr. Ben, any closing remarks for us?
Oh gosh, just keep reading, keep writing if you're writing. Whatever makes your weird little heart happy, follow it.
Beautiful advice to our listeners. Make sure to go ahead and check out Mr. Ben. Check out the books. You're going to love them. For all of my horror fans, make sure you bookmark this because you want to go back and keep up with Mr. Ben and all of the short stories. So absolutely, Mr. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. It has been such a pleasure.
No, thanks for having me. It's been really nice to meet you.
It's been a
Hopefully we'll do
pleasure.
it again. Oop.
Absolutely. So let us know when the next one comes out. We're here and we'd love to hear back from you.
You got it.
To our listeners, remember, if you're new to the podcast, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss a single episode. We have amazing authors coming up. And this is getting ready to wrap up our amazing new season release. We got one more episode tomorrow before we go back to our regular schedule on Monday. So make sure to check us out. And if you have any questions, my dear friends, send us a note. Let us know. Make sure to share this episode with a friend. We're always better when we're growing together. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.